starts now and letting everybody in.
All right.
Good evening, everybody. I think we are about ready to get started. Thanks for joining us for our presentation tonight. Kendrick, if you'd like to kick us off.
You got it. Thank you, Bob. Well, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Kendrick, and we have a great presentation here by Gord Ellis, and our director, Jerry Darkus, is going to tell you a little more about Gord and the Nipigon. We are a membership organization. We're an affiliated society of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. So all our memberships are actually paired with the museum. So when you join the club, you also are joining the museum at the same time. So it's a great way to just get more involved with the natural world. We present both courses from experts and specific folks like Gord and Jerry, from both one-on-one classes all the way up to experts, and then also trips. Jerry actually just returned from a saltwater trip that you guys will all hear more about eventually. But there's a wide breadth of programs that we put on. We also love the conservation projects. So outside of our membership, when we do have the opportunity to have larger events, we're hoping the film festival comes back eventually, the Steelheaders Ball. We like to use those funds for conservation and or scientific research projects. So if you're not a member, I encourage you to please reach out to myself or Jerry, and we'll make sure that you get connected with the right people. And we would love to see you again here on a virtual meeting or on the water. Jerry, I will turn it over to you now to introduce our guest and get going. Before Jerry dives in there, I just want to let you all know that this is being recorded. So in the event that you have a friend that missed this, please pass it along. So that way we can get some more people to see this information and promote Gord as well. So Jerry, go ahead.
Okay, you got me?
We got
Yes,
you.
sir.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining in. I took a quick look at the participant list, and some familiar names there from a number of different locations, and appreciate you sitting in with us tonight. And also some names I didn't recognize. So if you're, just first presentation with the Trout Club you've come into here tonight, we appreciate it. And thanks for the support, because I know we've got a great program tonight. I met Gord Ellis, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, up actually on the Nipigon at the Quebec Lodge, and actually got to fish with Gord for a day on the Nipigon River. I learned a lot about the river, and anybody that goes up into that area, and if you make any inquiries on probably who's most knowledgeable person about the Nipigon system and brook trout of that area in general, Gord's name certainly is at the top of that list. Gord's an outdoor writer. He is based in Thunder Bay. He does guiding and a lot of other things, I think, too. So, Gord, I'll let you get going here. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight. And thanks for this presentation, and looking forward to it. So let's get rolling.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yep, we got you, man.
It's really good to be here. Jerry, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate being invited to talk to the members of Cleveland. I think this is my second museum gig. I was saying before we went live that I did the Canadian Sports Fishing Museum up here in Northwestern Ontario about 5 years ago. So my second museum gig. I am very happy to talk about something I truly love, which is brook trout and the Nipigon system. And I'll just say that I remember very well guiding Jerry because as a guide, you spend a lot of time with people who aren't necessarily maybe the best casters or haven't done a lot of fishing. You know, they maybe get out once a year or they get, one trip a year. Jerry was not that person. Jerry was a beauty in the boat. And I basically sat back and watched it unfold. Although I should say, Jerry, you'll remember this, the ugliest cast caught the biggest fish. I think you had a knot in your line and the fly was drifting downstream and 5-pound brook trout came up and ate it. So I remind some of my clients every once in a while that it doesn't always have to be a pretty cast to catch a big brook trout. So Jerry, thank you for that anecdote. So I'm going to go through a little PowerPoint here. I hope I can get it to work. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. So Jerry said a bit about me. I do a lot of things. I am a journalist and a broadcaster in Thunder Bay. I actually work for the public broadcaster up here, so I do radio and web. Also, this publication, Ontario Outdoors, I've written for. This was next year actually is my 30th year writing for Ontario Outdoors. I'm the senior editor for that magazine, which is Ontario's largest fishing and hunting magazine. I've fished all my life. I grew up in an outdoors family. I fell in love with brook trout at an extremely young age. My dad took me out pretty much as soon as I could walk fishing, and my first memories are catching brook trout in a creek that's 15 minutes from where I live right now called McVicker Creek. And those little 8-inch brook trout got my heart. And I've just gone from there. I've always been crazy about brook trout. That hasn't changed. I do fish for everything. I am multi-species and I fly fish and I troll for muskie and I do everything. But brook trout are at the top of my list. And I never thought I would guide. A lot of times people will say to me, how many years you've been guiding? Like 40 years or something. I go, no, I've been guiding. This was my 9th year guiding. I never thought I'd be a guide, never wanted to be a guide. I was a tournament fisherman. I did all this other stuff. And I ended up guiding for brook trout on the Nipigon River, which I really love. I was there anyways. So it's just turned out that I've started to guide. So anyway, a little bit, just a thumbnail sketch of some of the stuff I do. I've got about 30 slides here. I'm going to go through them. We will have a question and answer. If there is a burning question, I think Bob will take it and I can maybe address it as we go. Nipigon strain brook trout. So Nipigon strain brook trout are pretty famous around North America, around the world, really, for their size. They grow very big. The world record, which we're going to get to in a sec, caught in the Nipigon system. Very quick growing. They live a little longer than your typical brook trout. I think your standard brook trout, 5 or 6 years. Nipigon brook trout, maybe 7 or 8 years. Which, compared to a lake trout, which another very similar char, a lake trout can live 20 years or 25 years. So brook trout don't live a long time. Our brook trout in the Nipigon system, because of a whole bunch of conditions, grow very large and they grow really fast, extremely fast. They also have an incredible variability in shape and coloration. I mean, you'll get everything from an absolute football to a racy, very light colored fish. And the other thing I will say as I do this talk is I'm going to break down the system because it's not just one big system, but it's broken down into different areas. And those fish can look very different depending on where the area is. But anyway, Nipigon brook trout are bigger than a typical brook trout. And that's just how they're genetically made. Okay, there we go. The world record brook trout which was caught on July 15th July 21st in 1915, was caught by this gentleman, this well-dressed gentleman in the suspenders holding the world record brook trout. His name was Dr. Cook. He caught it on a trip down the river. In those days, there was no dams. There are now 3 dams on the river. We'll look at those in a bit. But in those days, there was no dams on the river. So what you did was you traveled to Nipigon from wherever you were, all over the world. But he lived in Fort William, which is Thunder Bay now, and traveled there. And then he went by rail up to the outflow of Lake Nipigon, where the Nipigon River started. And there'd be 2 native guides, and he would be in the gentleman angler in the middle. Dr. Cook was a fly fisherman, but the world record brook trout, by his own admission, was not caught on a fly. It was caught on fly gear. It was not caught on a fly. It was caught on what's called a cockatouche, which is a sculpin. Very, very common in the river. And I guess it was a massive hatch of caddisflies that day, according to the stories at the time. He did end up catching it, but it was on a bamboo rod, and 14.5 pounds. If you can imagine that, absolutely massive fish. And there's one side of the fish. In those days, mounts or skin mounts, they were done on birch bark. There's actually 2 sides of the world record brook trout. One side, what's left of it, is in the Nipigon Museum. The other side is floating around out there somewhere. We don't know where it is. Unfortunately, in 1991, the Nipigon Museum burnt down, and most of the world record brook trout burnt with it. There's a little charred bit of it left that you can see at the museum. But I actually, back when I was just really falling in love with the Nipigon system in the 80s, I used to go to the Nipigon Museum like I was going to church, and go and stand and stare at that skin, which didn't look that great. It was pretty wrinkly and dark and dusty. But just try to imagine what that fish was like. And it was absolutely massive. And one interesting point I'll make is this, over the years, has been it was a splake or whatever. Well, even back in 1915, there was so much, it was so much bigger than a typical Nipigon brook trout that they sent it away to an ichthyologist in Ottawa to have it verified as a brook trout. I'm talking, this is 1915. They didn't put it on a jet. It was probably put on a train or something on ice. It was sent away to be verified as a brook trout. And this is one of the reasons it's the longest, or close to the longest standing freshwater world record. Anyway, that's just a glimpse of the fish. Many people still want to break that record. I get asked every year if I think it could happen. I do think it could happen. Is it really, I think it was a freak in its day even. So, if there's another freak out there, maybe we'll catch it. People have been traveling to the Nipigon system for a long, long time. And I'm talking 150 years, at least, well-traveled 110, 120 years, just to fish for brook trout in the Nipigon River. That's how good it was, and that's how famous it was. Prince Edward, who was a pretty famous royal, who was quite a sporter apparently, traveled in 1919 from England to the Nipigon system to catch brook trout and shoot birds and God knows what else. Anyway, and there's skin mount of a fish. Now this one, it says interestingly 15.5 inches, which is not really that big a brook trout then, but the prince caught it. So the prince caught it, it was a big one. But your average fish, even back in 1915, was 3-4 pounds, which it still is. There was bigger ones and there was more fish, definitely, but a 7 or 8 pounder was a giant then, and it's a giant now, and they're still around. Anyway, lots of history. People, like, there's Nipigon brook trout skin mounts on birch bark all over the world, quite literally. It's unbelievable how many people came to the Nipigon River to catch a giant brook trout, and they still do to this very day. Okay, the river historically was an unbelievably wild place. If you want some homework after my talk, go to YouTube and type in historic Nipigon River or a Nipigon River film or any of those number of things. There's actual video of the river before it was dammed. It was a wild place. I wouldn't have been taking my big boats up the Nipigon River the way it was back before the dams. It was crazy. And there was lots of portaging. and a lot of the river was not fishable. Some of you who have fished the system, especially what we call Pine Portage and Jesse Lake and Split Rock. This is Split Rock. This actually, Jerry, is where you caught your fish. This is Split Rock. It looks a little different now than it did then. Now Split Rock has current, but it is, this was a whole lot of different river. It was the greatest trout river in the world. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It was just a tumult of fast water pools and big brook trout. Now they thrived then, and they still, despite everything, thrive now. Anyway, I love that shot. Just this guy like hooked onto a big trout in crazy water. To come back to the Nipigon brook trout. So one thing I find, a lot of people who will come to the Nipigon and they catch all these trout and they go, man, you know, like, it's amazing. I didn't hear about this earlier. Well, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that for many, many years, especially after the last dam went in 1957, the Nipigon River was terribly managed and was not really managed for brook trout. They basically wrote them off. The limit was 5 fish. You could kill 5 brook trout any size. When I started fishing there, people kept every brook trout they caught of any size, and the limit was 5. They also yo-yoed the river up and down. So you'd be on the river and they would drop 6 feet and expose everything, and it was awful. And the other thing that the erosion just was ruining the river. So this gentleman here, Rob Swainson, who I've known for almost 40 years, Rob came from Southern Ontario. He came as a biologist to Nipigon. He was a brook trout nut. He came and he just could not believe how deplorable the Nipigon River was. The fishing was terrible. The river was in a terrible state. And he spent his career pushing to fix that, among other things. And he did it with a lot of help. But Rob deserves unbelievable gratitude for doing this. And I was lucky at the time to be able to write about a lot of that stuff. So I was able to get some information out there. But Rob was the guy in the trenches dealing with the hydroelectric companies that had full control over the river, dealing with the anglers, many of whom had never let a fish go in their life. That catch and release was a completely alien thing, who believed that if you caught a brook trout, it was going to die if you let it go. They didn't believe otherwise. And Rob spent his career fixing that. And we have the Nipigon River as it is now, which is unbelievably good trophy fishing, where 30 years ago it really wasn't. So anyway, I always try to mention Rob in my talks. Great guy. He's retired now. Okay, Nipigon brook trout regs. One of the things that really has helped the river is regulation. It is quite a regulated system. The regulation is one fish that is over 22 inches. And so I had a guy this year, I was fishing with him. He says, that's the stupidest regulation I've ever heard. Why would you allow, why can't you kill a small one and let a big one? Or whatever, I want to fry up a 10 inch. So here was the reason. I was on a committee that came up with this regulation, so I'm well versed in this. The one fish over 22 inches, the reason that regulation was picked is that fish that is 22 inches is spawned 3 times. So a brook trout that's 22 inches is probably about 5 years old, 6 years old. And that fish has been on the reds, done its job 3 times. So after that, theoretically, it's probably got a spawn or 2 more in it, but it has spawned that 3 times. So that was there was some different regs over time, but that was the one that's been in place now for quite a while, almost 20 years now. The other big thing that happened on the Nipigon system was catch and release was encouraged. And it was encouraged, there was a group of anglers who really spearheaded this, and some of them were from Nipigon and some of them were from elsewhere, really getting people to release brook trout. And this hadn't been done. It hadn't been done on the Nipigon system. People killed everything. I can remember when I was, in my early 20s going to a trout derby and seeing people literally pouring coolers of brook trout out that they had caught and killed for a derby. And it was just like, what the heck is going on? It was just unbelievable to me that this was happening. It doesn't happen anymore. So what's happened with this regulation is that the average size has grown steadily, and bigger fish are common. I mean, there was a time when I started fishing in the early 80s, mid 80s. If you caught a 20-incher, that was a monster. Honest to God, that's like a 4-pounder. I was like, wow, you're high-fiving. That was your fish of the trip. 22, 23-inch fish, 5-6 pounders. In August, I'll see them almost every day, and which is amazing, you know, and sometimes numerous numbers of them. And certainly 18, 19 inches, they're actually fairly rare. 20-incher, I consider a 20-incher a standard fish on the Nipigon now. It's a pretty big brook trout. So it's made a huge difference, and hopefully it'll go that way. Every once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, we should, now that there's so many brook trout, we should go back to how it was." And I will fight that as long as I have breath. I will fight that that war. Okay, so the Nipigon fishing water, it's all beautiful. I'm telling you, it's all beautiful. There's no bad spots. It's all gorgeous, and some of it's better for certain times of year. But you can fish there from May to the end of the season, which on Lake Nipigon is September 15th. On the river, it's Labor Day. You can fish and catch trophy brook trout all open water season. Nipigon Bay, Lake Superior. My friend Jerry knows this area well. I fish it a fair bit. Nipigon Bay is a chunk of Lake Superior, a massive chunk. And the fish in Lake Superior, they are called coaster brook trout. It's just a colloquial term, coaster being they go up and down the coast. They're exactly the same brook trout as the ones we catch in the Lake Nipigon. There's been tons of genetic work done to see if they were different or whatever. They're all the same, but these ones live in Lake Superior. Lots of them spawn in the Nipigon River in the fall. There's a huge run up starting in July up the Nipigon River from Lake Superior. They're still there right now. Guy I know was out fishing for steelhead on the Nipigon just like a week ago, caught a 26.5-inch brook trout while he was fishing for steelhead. Now they're out of season. They've been out of season for 2 months, and they're spawning now. But there's a lot of big fish in Lake Superior, and it's only gotten better. It's gotten so much better in the last decade that you could honestly only fish Lake Superior and do really well. The one thing I will say about Nipigon Bay, Lake Superior, as compared to Lake Nipigon and even the river, I find the average size of the fish I catch in Superior are a little smaller. And I'm talking like, instead of like a 20-incher, an 18-incher. I'm not sure why that is. There seems to be actually a lot more fish overall in Superior in a lot of ways, but the average fish is maybe not quite as big. They're gorgeous in the spring. There's almost like steelhead, very silvery, very light colored. Excellent fighters, and they're right up shallow. Super fun to catch on a fly. The water is big though. All this water is big, but Lake Nipigon Bay is big, and you need to know what you're doing. You need either a guide or you need a big boat. You need to be very careful. This lake can get ugly. Okay, just to give you sort of an idea where we are. So this is Lake Superior. If you look right at the very top there, you see Nipigon. So that's where the Nipigon River comes in. Red Rock, which is right next to it, that's on Nipigon Bay. And then you'll see Rossport, Terrace Bay, Marathon, that entire coastal area. You can catch coaster brook trout all down that stretch. You can also catch them now, especially in the last few years, even around Thunder Bay. My folks live just east of Thunder Bay on Lake Superior. This past year in May, we were catching brook trout. They were 23 inches long, like 10 minutes from my dad's house, on my parents' house on the lake, which is unbelievable. Like, that's just unprecedented. It seems to be getting better and better. And you can actually catch them right down through into Minnesota now. But the most numerous coaster brook trout fishing is Nipigon Bay. And you'll see there's a little island archipelago there. It's called St. Ignace Island and Simpson Island and some other ones, Bowman Island. Very, very beautiful place to fish. And there is a outfitter that Jerry knows well out there. Gary Lang owns Bowman Island, another great place to go for brook trout. Anyway, just to give you an idea of the scope of Superior and where we're at. But that's historically where most of the brook trout are in Superior. So coaster brook trout, as I mentioned, They're generally lighter colored, especially early in the season. Sometimes you might think you have a lake trout or a steelhead on until you get it in the net and you go, oh wow, it's got you know, a square tail, white leading edge fins. It's a coaster. It's a brook trout. They'll be mixed in with steelhead. I mean, last year I was out catching spawned out steelhead, brook trout mixed right in there. So it's a pretty neat fishery. The Lake Superior fishery. There's also lake trout. We also have Chinook salmon, coho salmon. There's big pike, even walleye. You just never know what you're going to catch. But the coastal brook trout fishery is pretty unique in Lake Superior. Well, that's a great place. The river. So the river goes from the town of Nipigon, where it basically enters into Nipigon Bay on Lake Superior, and then it winds its way up to Lake Nipigon. So you can sort of get an idea here with these maps where things are at. Some of the spots that you'll see marked there are where the dams are: Portage Dam, Alexander Dam, and Cameron Falls Dam. These stilled a lot of the rapids that were famous on the Nipigon River. And the last one to go in, which is Pine Portage, that's where that dam basically dammed up where the world record was caught and some of the most famous rapids on the river, and created a reservoir called Forgan Lake. There's still brook trout in it. There's still brook trout throughout the system, but the fishery has changed a little bit, and there's nowhere near as much white water and rapids as there was historically. But it's a huge body of water. There's all sorts of water. And I mean, considering I've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days on this water, there's a lot of places I don't get to fish sometimes ever, or during, you know, I might only hit it once during the course of the season. There's that much water. It's a dream in many ways. Okay, so the lower part of the river, there's Alexander's Dam, which is basically the end of the line for all the fish that come out of Lake Superior. It's a very large dam. There's a big back pool there. This is where a lot of salmon fishing takes place. It's also, I've caught some gigantic brook trout here. It draws from Lake Superior primarily. Fish come up and they'll hit Alexander Dam and they'll hang out there and eat mayflies and smelt and whatever's coming through the turbines. And biggest fish that I caught this year, which was a 25-incher, was caught below Alexander Dam. So it's very accessible. There's several boat launches on it. It's like it has some nasty spots. This year it was a little lower than it normally is, and there was some rocks, and I noticed some people wreck their props and stuff. And it's also quite a swift section of river, but it's good fishing. Gapin's Pool. Gapin's Pool is located right above the Nipigon River Bridge, which is the Nipigon River Bridge, which we just got a glimpse of there in the previous slide. Huge span over the river. It's also all the traffic in Canada has to go across that bridge. There's no other routes. So if somebody decides to blow up the Nipigon River Bridge, all the traffic stops. There's no other routes. But Gapin's Pool is just above the Nipigon River Bridge. It's a famous pool. It's named after Don Gapin, who was the father of Dan Gapin, who some of you probably may have even met. Don Gapin had a chalet lodge on the Nipigon River back in the 50s. And they named this Gapin's Pool because he used to come down here and fish in the evenings. He'd walk down from the lodge, and he claims that he saw a brook trout that was probably bigger than the world record there. And I wouldn't doubt it, because I've seen absolutely and caught absolutely gigantic fish in Gapin's Pool, which you can see the transports going by on the highway from. It's crazy. You can see the bridge there, and then that's Gapin's Pool. And then it's kind of dog legs out into a big open area called Lake Helen. But this is a popular fishing spot, and there's rapids below. And again, lower river, a lot of these fish are coming out of Lake Superior, and there's big ones there every year. And that's a Gapin's Pool fish. That's 25-incher. I mean, you know, with the traffic roaring by, you can catch them. Like, honestly, to catch a brook trout like that, it's almost impossible, except if you go to Labrador or Quebec. I mean, we're talking like 3 or 4 places in, you know, maybe Patagonia. I mean, this is on the Trans-Canada Highway. You know, like, it's crazy. Anyway, that was a big brook trout caught on a fly, Gapin's Pool. Okay, other dams on the river. Well, we mentioned Alexander's Dam, that's on the left. On the right there, that is Pine Portage Dam. Pine Portage Dam is the top one on the system, and above that is Lake Nipigon. Basically, there are some different rigs on Lake Nipigon. Really, the major one, it's a single hook barbless. It's barbless on Lake Nipigon. Below, it's not. So if you're a fly fisherman, basically you can't use a double fly or triple fly on Lake Nipigon. You can use a dropper on the river and Lake Superior. Other than that, and it's a later season on Lake Nipigon. You can fish till September 15th, which I do. I fish right till the very end, and it's an earlier closure on the river. It's usually like the 6th or 7th of September. Anyway, big dams, tailwaters, especially in the springtime. Brook trout will move right up in these tailwaters and feed on smelt and stuff. That ice that you see on the right there at Pine Portage Dam, that picture was taken in early July of a few years ago. So you can imagine how cold the system is. That's another thing. It's hard to understand sometimes just how cold the system is. Last year in August, I got onto Lake Nipigon. My boat thermometer said 42 Fahrenheit. And what had happened is there'd been a big blow on Lake Nipigon. It blew for 4 days, blew all the warm water off, and then the cold water came up, and it was literally cold to the touch. And this is in the heat of the summer. So a lot of people think, I can't fish in July for brook trout. It's too warm. That's not in play on generally on the Nipigon system. There's always somewhere to fish. Cameron Falls section, I honestly don't fish this a lot. It's a very short section. It's beautiful, but I don't catch a lot of fish in it, and I don't know why. It's a short section between two dams. I don't know if there's not spawning there, or if it's dependent on fish coming over the dam, or what the deal is. It's beautiful. It's short, but I don't fish it a lot. But it actually looks a lot like the old river used to look. So I throw it in here, but I didn't even fish this section this year. I don't have a lot of success there generally. Pine Portage, which is it's actually famous. If you go on to YouTube and type in Nipigon River fishing, I would say of the 10 videos that pop up, 7 of them were done in this section of river. It is gorgeous. It's classic looking brook trout water. There are big brook trout here. There's also quite a few anglers. It probably gets more pressure than just about anywhere from really good brook trout fishermen. So I do fish here a lot, but it does get pressured a lot. It also has gigantic fish. Some of the biggest fish I've ever seen caught in the system. I come from the Pine Portage section, Jesse Lake section of the river. Beautiful water, crystal clear, cold, and not necessarily easy to fly fish. It's deep and it's swift, and it can be a bit of a challenge. It's a lot of chuck and duck, but classic water. Lake Nipigon. So Lake Nipigon is gigantic. It's a monster of a lake. It also is almost completely undeveloped, which is so rare in this day and age. I mean, I don't know how Lake Nipigon got away without being developed. I'm so glad it did. There's maybe on this gigantic lake, maybe 50 cottages. There's no lodge. There's no functioning lodge on Lake Nipigon. Like where I guide out of on Quebec Lodge, we drive to Lake Nipigon and put in every day. There's no lodge to speak of. There's some cabins and stuff. And there's not even a floating lodge. It's really an interesting scenario. A lot of it is remote and hard to get to, and a lot of it doesn't get fished very much. Most of the fishing takes place in the south end of the lake where there's the most access, and that's honestly where I fish the most because that's the most accessible. It's still fantastic fishing. So here's a look at Lake Nipigon. It is huge. It's the largest lake entirely in Ontario. So Lake of the Woods is potentially bigger, but Lake of the Woods has chunks in Minnesota and I think a piece in Manitoba. Perimeter 652 miles. The north-south length 70 miles. When you get on sections of this lake, you can't see the other side. Like it looks like the ocean. 50 miles, roughly 50 miles across. 500 islands. And some of these islands are so big that you could fly a plane in and land on the lakes on the islands. It's absolutely massive. In fact, the the bottom end, the south end of the lake and the north end of the lake actually have a different climate. They're it's much colder on the north end of the lake. Anyway, it's just an incredible place. There are some hardy folks who go out on these islands and they'll spend a week camping and fishing and have an incredible experience. They can also be bound to the islands by winds for days on end too. This is big water, and it's formidable water. There's not a lot of people out there. Even when you go to, I'll go to there's a launch in South Bay where I do a lot of fishing, and I'll go there and I'll see like 10, 12 vehicles and get out on the lake and not see any boats all day. They're just spread out somewhere. So it is a daunting piece of water. I don't know if this, I got some little videos here. So yeah, so this is the same day, by the way. These two fish were caught, 25 and 24 inches within about 20 minutes. This is South Bay. And these women are, these are regular groups. I have a lot of groups that come up and fish with me for 3 or 4 or 5 days. I have a couple clients who actually come up for 7 days or 6 days and just fish brook trout, fly fish brook trout primarily. And these two women, Alyssa and Chantel, and there's another lady that fish with them, with these two. Amazing anglers, and some of the fish they catch are incredible. They're just phenomenal fishermen, but they fell in love with fishing on Lake Nipigon in particular because the fish are so damn big. There's just a lot of big fish in the lake. It's not always easy fishing. It can be a struggle, but it's one of my favorite places to fish. Okay, fly fishing the system. We'll talk a little bit about gear. I generally tell people bring a 7 or 8 weight fly rod when they come. Bill Spicer, who is the gentleman there on the right, looking super happy. Bill's a great guy. I did a show with him 3 years ago. Phenomenal fisherman. He's one of the very few people who I think can fish a 6 weight on the system and get away with it. I use an 8 weight generally. It's big water. The fish are big. Every once in a while, you hook into a lake trout or 20-pound pike or a Chinook, which Bill actually did when we were doing our shoot on the lower river. And it can be a real handful. It's also heavy water. So bigger, I find heavier gear works a lot better. It's generally sinking lines or sink tip lines. You can catch them on a floating line. You can catch them on shooting lines. I had a guy last year using a shooting line, throwing at the bank, and he did great. So there's lots of different ways that there's no, exact way to do it, but there is, generally it's sink and a lot of big streamers and stuff. You can catch them on dries. It's not common. Last year, we actually had quite a good season catching a few fish on dries in a couple spots I'm going to show you in a bit. But generally, you're fishing streamers, larger streamers, and bigger flies and heavier gear. Again, big fish, and these things are eating smelt a lot of the time, and sculpins and big stuff. Like they'll cough up 4-inch smelt like nothing, and they do eat caddis and smaller things. But if they can eat something bigger, they will. A couple flies that I like to use. Oh God, I can't remember what that one on the white one. It's a Bigfoot or something like that. Anyway, big fly, looks like a smelt, or it's a real attractor. Sex dungeons are really a good pattern as well. Different ones like that. By the way, the Muddler Minnow, which is maybe the most famous fly in the world, was developed by Don Gapin, our friend who had the lodge above Gapin's pool on the Nipigon River. And the reason that he developed it was to look like a sculpin or a cockatouche. So a lot of these patterns that we use today that are, a little fancier, a little cooler, a little flashier, are a muddler for all intents and purposes.
Hey, Gord, before you move on, we got a clarification on what the white one was.
Oh, okay.
It's called the Granto Sasquatch, I believe.
Yes, thank you. What I say, Bigfoot?
Something like that. Yeah.
Sasquatch, that's right. When I actually first bought that fly, I bought it at a shop and they didn't know what it was. And I used it, I think like 2 days later, I gave it to a woman who caught like a 7-pound brook trout on it. So then I was trying to find them and getting people to tie them. And especially when you're guiding, you're just so busy. But anyway, okay. That's a great fly, by the way. Butt monkey is a very popular, good fly. Can't remember what this one on the right's called, but anyway, you see a pattern develop here. Earlier in the season, later patterns tend to be better, white, silver, generally. And as the season wears on, I find you get into the darker ones, the blacks, lots of browns. I mean, there's, ginger colors. There's all sorts of different flies. Every year there's a different fly that's hot, and then we scramble to either get somebody to tie them or we tie them, or but butt monkeys have been a good one, and just plain muddlers work well. As far as dry flies, they use a lot of stimulators. Just they're easy and look like everything. And I haven't found any brook trout that's hitting on the surface in this system generally isn't very selective, quite honestly. Like if he's coming up, he's probably going to come up on whatever's floating on the surface coming down. And that includes, there's one spot I fish in the river where there's a lot of people float fishing. They'll hit the floats as often as they'll hit whatever's underneath. Like they'll come up and hit stuff on the surface every once in a while. So anyway, there's a few flies. This is a section on, it's actually on Lake Nipigon. It's called the Overflow. It's a short section, but it has some current and you can wade. It's one of the very few places on the upper part of the system that you can wade, and you can catch some beautiful fish wading here. It's not a place you can put a lot of people, and when you're guiding, it's a bit of a boat ride to get there. And if you get there and somebody beats you to it, then you basically turn around and have to leave. But if you get there and there's nobody there and you get to fish it first, you can have some really good fun. And this was actually a good spot this past year for fishing dries. Here's just another look at the Overflow. It's a short section of river, but it's fairly shallow, and it's amazing the big fish that'll cruise into shallow water. Brook trout are not afraid of shallow water, and this can be to their detriment. This year I caught more trout that had talon marks in them than I've ever seen, and in fact, for the first time ever this year, I had an eagle try to steal a trout off one of my clients on Lake Nipigon, which really, he didn't get it, but it was very, very, very close. So, but these trout are in 2 feet of water, or even less sometimes. So you can catch them in some pretty shallow stuff, but it is possible to do some wading on the system. But generally, I would say 90% of the time, maybe more, we're in boats, just because of where we're fishing and how we're fishing, and ease of getting around. As I mentioned, most of the fly fishing is from boat fishing, period, but fly fishing, you can do it quite successfully. And generally I can have 2 people, I use fairly large boats, and generally I can have 2 people fly fishing from the boat. Usually one's in the front, one's in the back. I have a handheld remote that I use, and I'll sit in the middle and drive the boat down the shore, or stand and watch. And I've even, when I have exceptionally good fly fishermen, which I don't have a ton of, but every once in a while I get 3 people who can fly fish together in a boat. And it can be tricky, but generally 2. And or my preference is 1 really good angler, but that's not always possible. Anyway, what we'll do by and large is move down shoreline, fish reefs, and covers lots of water. And over time, like anybody, any guide, there's certain spots that just give up more fish than others. Pardon me. Little sneezer. Anyway, you can see some beautiful fish. Both those fish were caught within a couple of days of each other. The guy at the bottom, that was a 25 incher. He caught 2 that day. It's not always that great. You can see the weather that day wasn't particularly good. There was no other anglers around that helped us. I catch lots of good fish on sunny days, but crappy weather can help you as well, especially when they'll come in a little bit shallower, I think, generally. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about where I guide out of. This is Quebec Lodge. It's in a place called Red Rock. You can actually look over Nipigon Bay, Lake Superior. It's a beautiful spot. It's not on the water. We trailer to spots, but the good thing about that is that we can go to different spots. So almost every day I'll go to a different area, unless a client wants to fish the same spot. Some do, but you can fish Nipigon Bay one day. You can fish a chunk of the river the next day. Go up to Lake Nipigon, and we'll trailer there. This lodge was built in the 30s. It was built actually as a place where the owners of a lumber company that worked out of Red Rock, they built, and that's why it's called Quebec Lodge, because the lumber company was from Montreal or thereabouts. And it's just a gorgeous place. It's beautiful and rustic and very funky, and we can get about 12 people in there. Yeah, it's generally a bunch of anglers crazy about brook trout, and every once in a while we'll have a little fire and get the guitars out around that too. So it's a fun place to stay, and this is my home away from home during the summer. I spend probably 50-55 days here the summer, and I love it. Again, I think this was my 9th year. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to going back already. Ray Rivard's the owner. Ray takes responsibility for getting me into guiding. He bugged me for years to guide. I did not want to guide. He finally broke me down, and so I'm guiding. So anyway, Ray's a character. He's a great guy, yeah. So he's the man at the lodge. Every once in a while he goes fishing. So anyway, you can, if you're interested, Ray at Nipigon River Adventures.com is the contact. There's also, he has a Facebook page. Of course, you can get a hold of me too. I'm pretty available, and I have a website, which I'll show you in a second. Anyway, Nipigon, if you're a brook trout person, you should come to the Nipigon before you kick the bucket. I'm telling you, it's it's the trophy fishery for brook trout. Yeah, a handful of brookie, and you get some occasional fatties too. Like this, it's probably an 8-pound brook trout. I don't weigh them. I never weigh trout generally, but that was a big one. There's my website if you want to check out a little bit more about me. I do have a website. You can contact me there. I'm happy to talk to you. You can, if you're interested in guiding, I can discuss that with you as well. I have some other stuff on there as well, but that's it, gordellis.com. And that's my presentation. So I'd be happy if anybody has any questions to field some.
Hey, Gord, this is Gary Amendola. I was very impressed with your presentation and the size of the brook trout. It just kind of blew me away. We had scheduled a trip through the Trout Club in, I think, June of last year, and obviously couldn't go. And we're hoping to be able to get going. What is the, in your opinion, the best time to go during the warm weather months?
Well, honestly, you can catch them the whole period. I like August because it's the nicest period. That's one of my favorite periods, but I've had incredible fishing in July, which is generally pretty quiet on the whole system. Like I'll go to the South Bay launch or go to the river in July and there's nobody there. It's not because there's no fish there. It's just because people think, oh, July, like let's go to the camp and, get on the party barge and drink margaritas. But actually, July is a great time to go. In the spring, in May and June, it's a little bit cooler. There's a few more bugs, but that's traditionally a great time to catch brook trout. There's certainly sections of the system that fish extremely well then. When I started guiding on at Quebec Lodge, everybody came in June. And there's still a lot of people in June. It's kind of shifted a little bit later in the season, I think, because people started seeing these really colored up fish, which are gorgeous. You know, they're definitely the most colorful later in the season. And if you want the most colored fish, well, you probably fish in the last 2 weeks of the season, which is the first 2 weeks of September. And then you get these big males that are all colored up. I find that fishing near the end of the season is actually not as good as a little earlier in the season, or even into August. For whatever reason, they start moving around in September. It can be a little trickier to track them down, and it can be a little frustrating sometimes to try to find them. That being said, some of the biggest fish, and also certainly the most colorful fish, are caught later in the season. So late July, August, probably my favorite time.
Great, thank you. And there's nothing wrong with sipping on a few margaritas.
I agree, my friend.
Gord, I have a question for you. I'm Harry Rzepka. I have caught some speckled trout or brook trout, but mine have that purplish round color spots on it. Now the fish I'm looking at right now on the computer doesn't have any. It looks more like a lake trout, or it doesn't have the speckles of a speckled trout that I caught in the Minipie or up in Labrador. Are they different species? Are they?
No, they do have those dots. Actually, I don't know. I mean, the blue halos are there. The red is there. It's all there, Harry. Maybe the pictures aren't showing it up well enough, but these are brook trout. Now, you know, I've never seen myself. I've seen the Minipie fish. They look different than Nipigon brook trout. You know, they probably are not exactly the same, but these are brook trout in every way. And they do have the blue halos and the red dots. And one of the weird things about Nipigon brook trout, we actually get a lot of we call them double halos. They actually look like an 8. And I've caught brook trout all over the place too. And I've never seen more than on a Nipigon brook trout of these like double halos.
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry.
Very much.
Anybody else?
Gord, it seems like we've got a quiet crowd tonight. No
Okay.
questions in through the chat either. But
All right.
want to say thank you very much for joining us and giving your presentation. Yeah, Jerry or Kendrick, anything to close us out tonight?
Nothing in particular, Bob. Again, very enjoyable presentation. And I, have certainly been lucky enough to experience some of the stuff that Gord showed. Most of my experience has been out on Nipigon Bay, but, have spent a few days on the river too. So, and I mean, it's the whole area it's an amazing place, and really has turned into one of my favorite trips really of all time going up there. It's just surprising how accessible it is and how good the fishing is. You don't find those two things in combination anymore. So want to say thanks to everybody for joining in tonight. If you're not a member of the Trout Club, give us a look and think about it. And Gord, thank you very much on behalf of the club and everybody that sat in tonight. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next spring, probably the end of May, early June.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Hey, Gord, I actually just thought of one question. I think you mentioned during the presentation that there's also steelhead and a couple of salmon species in this area. Are there any concerns about like stocking those like non-native salmonids on top of the native brook trout, like about them competing for food or habitat or anything, or do they pretty much coexist pretty well?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And one thing I'll tell you right away is that we have very little stocking in our part of the world, especially in Lake Superior or in Lake Nipigon. So the salmon that we have, which are coho, chinook, and also we have pink salmon, they're naturalized. So they were originally stocked in the 50s or 60s, but they're naturalized in the system. They come into the Nipigon River and some of the tribs, and they spawn, and then the baby salmon go back into Lake Superior and do their thing. Theoretically, you would think the brook trout would get their butts kicked, but the brook trout are feisty little buggers. And I've actually watched brook trout and salmon, which the Chinooks and the brookies spawn at the same time. I've watched brook trout chase salmon off reds. It's really quite something. I'm sure they compete for food and other stuff, but salmon spend most of their time way out in the lake, and brookies are very tight to shore. There's probably a little more intermingling in the river, especially the lower river. Lake Nipigon, there's no stocking, but there's no salmon in Lake Nipigon. And there's also, thank God, no lamprey. We do have lamprey in Lake Superior, but lamprey have not. One of the good things about the dams on the Nipigon River is that lamprey didn't get into Lake Nipigon. Because Lake Nipigon also has one of the world's greatest lake trout fisheries, and also has giant pike, like you would not believe, which is a whole other session itself. I mean, there's probably no better place to catch a giant lake trout right now, at least accessibly, than Lake Nipigon. I mean, 30 pounders are not uncommon. Like it's 40 pounders, 20 pounders are nothing, quite literally. Like they're caught all the time. And huge pike. I mean, last year my fly guys were catching 45-inch pike fishing brook trout. So Lake Nipigon is something. But as far as stocking, we don't stock. Our steelhead are all naturalized. They've lived with the brook trout as long as they've 110, 20 years. We have great steelhead fishing, actually. Not so much in the Nipigon. The Nipigon River is kind of weird in that the steelhead fishing is not that great in the big river, but the tributaries in the springtime that are down the coast either way are really good generally, especially east of Nipigon. And we do get them incidentally fishing for brookies in the lake. I'm sure Jerry's caught salmon and Lakers and steelies out way out on Bowman Island. So it's a real mixed bag in Superior, which is one of the cool things about it. But we don't really have stocking to speak of.
Cool, thank you. I did not realize those fish could be naturalized or spawn on their own up there. But
I think part of it, honestly, is just the health and the cleanliness of the system. Like the Nipigon River is just, it's a jewel. Even with 3 hydroelectric dams on it, it is as clean and as cold and as pure a water as you'll see, honestly. And same as Nipigon Bay. Nipigon Bay is like unbelievably clear and clean and cold. There has been pollution there in the past. There was a mill at the mouth of the Nipigon River at one point that dumped effluent in, but that's been closed for 15 years, and the bay is cleaned up incredibly, and it's actually helped the fishery a lot. I'm sure that's part of the reason why the coasters have come back so strongly, but we just have incredibly cold, clear water, and trout thrive, salmon thrive, like they just thrive in it. So.
Mhm.
All right, Gord, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll be in touch soon about a December event with the Trout Club, but subscribe for our emails and follow us on Instagram for updates on what the club is doing. Thanks so much, everybody.